of Strafford, and pleased to welcome you here today for a very special presentation by our neighbor, Valerie Miller. We're going to keep it pretty simple. We're going to light the chalice, and then I'll say a few words about Valerie, and then when we're done, I'll put out the chalice. So, put out the candle, thank you. Unaccustomed as I am to public speaking. So may the light we now kindle inspire us to use our powers to heal, not to harm, to help, not to hinder, to bless, not to curse, to serve you, Spirit of freedom. For more than 35 years, Dr. Valerie Miller has collaborated with grassroots organizations, NGOs, women's movements, and international agencies around the world as an organizer, educator, evaluator, researcher, and human rights advocate. She currently serves as senior advisor and co-founder of Just Associates, JASS, an international network of activists and scholars working on gender, movement building, and social change strategies. At JASS, she facilitates workshops, seminars, and university courses on power, advocacy, rights-based development, and strategic planning with organizations around the world. In the Upper Valley, Valerie teaches courses on women's rights at Osher. In the 1980s, she served as a special advisor and official historian to the Nicaraguan literacy campaign under the Sandinistas, and was later active in the Central American Peace and Solidarity movement. Valerie has served as a congressional advisor in Central America. She has also helped coordinate a prominent Washington-based human rights coalition composed of over 50 national NGOs and labor groups working to change U.S. foreign and military policy. At the Unitarian Universalist Social Action Committee, Valerie directed domestic and international work on human rights, leading congressional delegations to Central America and the Philippines, writing campaign materials and speaking around the country. Over the years, she has been a policy advocate director at Oxfam America and has collaborated with a wide variety of organizations including UNICEF, AWID, Women's Law and Development International, the Highlander Center, the United Nations Commission on Human Rights, Action Aid International, AAI, and the Participation Powers Social Change Group at the Institute for Development Studies at Sussex. Drawing on her experience and her doctorate from the UMass Amherst in adult education, she has led a wide range of evaluations and co-authored numerous articles and books on literacy, human rights, advocacy, and power, including The Nicaraguan Literacy Crusade, Between Struggle and Hope, A New Wave of Power, People and Politics, Action Guide for Advocacy and Citizen Participation with Lisa Van Gelassen, and most recently, Critical Webs of Power and Change with Action Aid Team. My goodness. So, extremely pleased to welcome Valerie.
Well, it's quite a treat to be here with you today. It's always a challenge, I find, when I do talks, to kind of stay on the timeline, because I get very carried away, and so I will talk, and then all of a sudden the time is going by and I haven't finished what I want to say. So what I did today was I tried to write down, I took extensive notes to try and figure out exactly, okay, how much time do I have? Because you want to leave time for questions and answers, because that's a rich chance to really exchange ideas and thoughts. So hopefully I've been able to do that. I hope I can. And what we're going to do today is look at some experiences I've had that range from Mexico to Ecuador to Nicaragua to Washington, D.C., to Boston, Massachusetts to Panama. So we're going to do a quick tour of those countries and places. And so, as I said, it's really a treat to be here with you all today. When I was in my 30s and 40s, I worked, as John mentioned, at the Unitarian Universalist Service Committee. And at first I was an organizer and interpreter for congressional delegations. And then I became head of the Human Rights Department. It was really a high point in my life. And so being with you here together is a continuation of that, and a real thread, a special thread for my life. But now reaching my lofty 70s, can you imagine? Just wait, well, can happen to you. With my wealth of wrinkles and whitish hair. I have reached a point that's not so high in my life. In fact, it's rather low. It's meant that I've been in my basement for several months, sorting through the boxes of my life. That challenge that some of you have faced in downsizing. It's tough. I don't know whether you've been able to do it very well, but I have not. I'm quite lousy at the task, trying to figure out what stays, what goes. One thing I know, the task elicits and inspires an amazing amount, a flood of memories, a wealth of memories. Some of the images are dark, some of them are light. Life's multiple moments that give meaning and magic to every day and to our struggles and hopes. So at least that's what the time in the basement has been revealing to me. That is, when I'm not fighting with my dear husband, Ralph, over my slow progress in these boxes, and I see people shaking their heads if they've had that experience. I tend to greet the task with a certain reluctant mix of wonder and curiosity. What will I find today in my boxes? And I brought one with me today for you. Let's see what's in these boxes. What will I find today? What will I not want to throw away? Something my husband does definitely not want to hear. So I have one of my boxes here to share some of the treasures with you as part of my story. The memories behind each one and the unexpected connections across the years that they convey. From Washington to Strafford. Here's one I found the other day. It's from an organization called the World Resources Institute. March 1992, written by one Gus Speff. I give it to you for your boxes. But then I found another one from the UNDP, the United Nations Development Program. From one with the introduction, Gus Speff. So you get two, Gus. That's one way to get rid of your stuff, right? Oh dear. So, I mean, who knew? I mean, the wonderful miracles of life, right? Someone who you admired for so long, and then he ends up kind of as a neighbor across the way in your 70s. So the world could truly be a mysterious and miraculous place. So, thinking about our stories and my story, and where do our stories start? What are the turning points? What are the plot lines that guide our stories? Mine can be summed up pretty easily. It's my love of Latin America, my passion for the Spanish language, and the quest that that love has inspired and engendered over these years. A quest really shaped by a life immersed in poor communities around the world, working as an organizer and educator, and in the halls of power, working as an advocate and an activist. Where do our stories lead us? What roads do we take? What roads do we make in our journey along the way? And who along this journey, what people, have really helped challenge us and shake our souls? Whether we become complacent, cynical, apathetic, or stubborn activists. Who are those people? What have they said to us? What are those experiences? So in going through my boxes, all these questions I am considering, which of course slows me down even more, not so good. But what started me on this journey? What started me on my story? Well, quite frankly, when I look back, it was nothing more than 5th grade paranoia. What grades are you in?
I'm in 3rd grade.
You're in 3rd? In 5th, okay. So I had paranoia when I was in 5th grade. Okay, so what was the paranoia? A bunch of missionary kids had moved in across the street. Their parents were on furlough from Colombia or Chile. And of course, when we played together, they inevitably reverted to Spanish because it was really their mother tongue. And I inevitably thought they were talking about me behind my back. So I decided that I have to learn Spanish. There's no other way around this. So that's what started me on my journey, was 5th grade paranoia. And from there, of course, I went to high school. I took high school Spanish. I was scared to death of my Spanish teacher. I hid behind the girl in front of me because I was scared. It was not a very auspicious start on my journey at all. But from high school Spanish and college, I went and I spent a summer abroad in Mexico. And that experience really shook me profoundly because I had an amazing professor called Dr. Edmundo Flores. Dr. Edmundo Flores was an articulate, very handsome, political scientist who specialized in Latin American history. And he started, not surprisingly, to tell the story of Latin America from a Latin perspective, which of course I had never heard before. He started with the case of Guatemala. And at the end of his presentation that day, I was furious because he told me a story that I had never heard before. He told me the story of the US CIA and how in 1954 it toppled the democratically elected government of Jacobo Arbenz, who was working on a variety of reforms to really address the problems of inequity and injustice in the country. And we replaced Jacobo Arbenz with a man named Castillo Armas, who became a dictator, persecuted peasants, academics, student activists, all the people who were supporting the reforms of the Arbenz revolution, the Arbenz government. And it led to over 36 years of civil war in that country. It ended with over 200,000 people being murdered, tens of thousands having to flee their villages because their villages were burned down. And so I was listening to this story and I just couldn't believe it. So I stood up and I said, I'm sorry, Dr. Flores, you're wrong. My country would never do such a thing. My country has a constitution, has a Declaration of Independence. It's impossible to think something like that of my country. And so at the end of the whole semester, Dr. Flores, who was teaching this group of mostly American students in the summer school, he said, I know that a lot of you haven't believed a word I've said. I know that. So what I want to do is I want to challenge you to go back to university, study any of the cases we've talked about, and you make your own conclusions. Well, I was a serious student, so I went back to my library in college, and I researched Guatemala. And at the end of 2 months of studying in that library, I came out shaken to my core. Because he was right and I was wrong. And so that was really the turning point and the birth of all the work of social justice that I have been involved in over these last 50 or so years. And so those kinds of people, that kind of moment that really can shape us in ways we don't anticipate. So going from there, from Mexico, my new husband and I, after we graduated from college, went into the Peace Corps in Panama. And we went to live and work in a little tiny rural village. And we were very fortunate because we worked with a housing co-op and a fishing co-op. And they were very successful at that time. It was really a time of hope. It was a time of Pope John XXIII, some of you may be familiar with, the liberation theology, the Catholic Church's doctrine of preferential option for the poor, that the church was going to be focused, and the priests and nuns were going to be focused on changing the lives of the poor and marginalized in the world. And so it was a time of great hope. But too soon, the lessons that I had learned in Mexico from Edmundo Flores came back to haunt me in a different way. The lessons about power and politics. Through the fishing co-op, we were fortunate to work with a wonderful priest from Colombia. His name was Hector Gallegos. And Hector Gallegos, along with community people in the northern part of the mountains near where we live, had set up and created this whole network of commercial cooperatives where they would sell food to the community at a reasonable price and then buy the crops and produce of the peasants. They were so successful that they generated a backlash. And so the elites in that area were furious because it was encroaching on their interests. And they began looking for support from some of their relatives in the military. One of their relatives was a man some of you maybe have heard of, Manuel Noriega, who became a ruler and dictator of the country later on. One night, Hector disappeared. He was taken, according to witnesses, he was taken from his house by some military people. And probably what happened, because this was common practice then, he was taken up in a helicopter and dropped over the ocean. This was a common practice at that time to get rid of your opponents. Later on, of course, Manuel Noriega became, well, he was a CIA informant then, but was very involved in the drug cartels. And at one point, the U.S. decided they had enough of him. They invaded Panama and killed at least 3,000 civilians in that marine invasion. And that haunts me today, especially having been a Peace Corps volunteer. And having been and continuing to be a U.S. citizen. So, from those moments in Panama, I went on to grad school. And that was at UMass Amherst. And that was a wild time. It brought together a crazy, madcap group of people who were these kind of, I'll call them educator activists. Incredible experience. They'd worked with the UN, they'd worked with the Peace Corps, they had worked with liberation movements in Africa. It was quite a conglomerate of very dedicated people. And one of the things, let me see that. Oh, let's see, I forgot. I have to show you something. Here we go. I did. So when I was in Panama, did I get to Panama? Yeah, I was in Panama already, right? Okay. So this I wanted to show you because in Panama we lived in a little house. The kitchen was made out of bamboo and had a dirt floor. And so I said, I have to get something that will brighten up the kitchen. This is what I got. And I kept it all this time as a memory of those extraordinary people who I met, and people like Hector Gallego, and of U.S. policy. So it stays with me. I'll put it here. So there's that. Oh, another thing I forgot. Amazing book for those of you who want to know about Guatemala. It's called Bitter Fruit, and it is the story of U.S. policy in Guatemala over the years, written by Stephen Kinzer and Arthur and Stephen Schlesinger. Stephen Kinzer and Stephen Schlesinger. He was a journalist for the Boston Globe, and it's a very concise analysis of what happened in Guatemala. Okay, so I go to UMass Boston and the Ed School, and they have this fabulous project that's called the Non-Formal Education Project of Ecuador. It was working on education programs, especially for poor communities, peasant communities in the rural highlands, helping people learn how to read and write, helping people to become better, more effective community leaders, to organize. And so we did, let's see, so these were some of the stuff that we put together for the Ecuador project. And we did a lot of games. We developed a game like Monopoly, what was called Hacienda, which was to help people look at the power forces in their communities and then to figure out, okay, so what strategies might make sense for us to do it. A lot of them were consciousness raising, simulation games. Here was Hacienda. Let me just pass these around for any of you who want to look at them. it was really so much fun because we were working on designing programs where we could see immediate, almost immediate differences. Working in literacy with poor communities, urban communities, rural communities, and people would come into the programs, into the literacy programs, and this is the way they would come in. Very shy, very submissive, again, because of the power dynamics over centuries that essentially taught them they were down there, everybody else was up here, especially the white guys. And at the end of these workshops, I mean, sometimes it was just, or these classes, sometimes it was 2 weeks. People would walk out of those classes like this, with their heads up, looking you in your eye. It was quite an extraordinary experience, so powerful, so moving. So this group in Ecuador, it was a few people from the States, and then about 4 or 5 Ecuadorians. And some of them were revolutionary wannabes, I have to tell you. But we were all committed, again, to the ideas of Paulo Freire. I mean, how do you help people learn to read the word and the world? And so one of the things that we did, that got us into trouble eventually, was create photonovelas. Now these essentially are like stories, photo stories of people's lives, right? They're wonderful stories. And we focus on indigenous communities. So this was one of our good friends, Enrique Tasiwan and his wife. But the idea was to tell stories of people's lives, local people's lives, and also to essentially talk about different solutions that they might have to their problems. A big problem was land. I mean, the peasants were essentially, and the Indian population was put on the sides of mountains. The beautiful lands in the valleys were the lands that belonged to the whites or the conquistadores, the hacendados. So we had these different stories. Okay? They were really creative. They were sold throughout the country. It was a huge hit. We were so excited. Okay. But then we got a little bit carried away, or some of us did. I can't remember whose idea it was, but unfortunately I don't have it here. So one of the problems they talked about was the land situation. The fact that the indigenous lands had been taken away from them so many centuries ago. So that was the problem. The solution was kidnap the hacienda daughter, the hacienda owner's daughter. Okay? Now, this might have been a problem for all sorts of reasons, but it was a problem because this was sponsored and paid for by the United States Agency for International Development. So they were on top of us for this publication. I think they did close on the road. Oh, here, I'll pass it around. So on some levels it was our gesture of resistance and defiance to U.S. imperialism and colonialism and everything else that we published this thing. We really were a crazy band of troublemakers, and we were so proud of it. We chuckled so loudly about this. Small gestures of resistance that give you energy. So there were times of silly satisfaction, but also times of great humility and lessons that I was taught. Enrique Tasiwan, my friend, one of the indigenous leaders in our program and in his community, and in fact in the indigenous world of Ecuador. He really raised a very important question to me. And we were at a workshop in the rural areas in a place near Chimborazo. Chimborazo, for those of you who've been to Ecuador, is this amazingly beautiful snow-capped volcano. And on the sides of it, you just see, it's like a patchwork quilt of different textures and different colors, and it represents the different parcels of land that indigenous communities and peoples are farming. And so I'm waxing eloquent with my exuberance. Oh my God, Enrique, it's so beautiful. Just look, that looks like a patchwork quilt. Can you imagine? And Enrique stops me. And he says very quietly and very gently, says, if for you, Valerie, that represents beauty, for us, that represents centuries of exploitation, of discrimination, of domination. Because those little patches that you see are the little parcels of land that we have to farm because we can't farm the rich valleys. And so, I mean, I was stunned because I hadn't seen it that way, even though I knew all the history, and I hadn't seen it that way. And it just raised questions in, how do we see the world, and how can we walk in the shoes of other people to understand their histories and their views, so that together we can construct and build a different kind of society and a different kind of world based on justice and respect. So Enrique really left me with that question that on some levels was quite traumatic, but also was something that I have carried with me to today, and that has inspired me all these years. So, moving from Ecuador to Nicaragua, which is so much in the headlines these days, or should be in the headlines these days. So my work in Nicaragua brought more moments of humility and learning, and deeper understanding of power and politics, and peace. So I first went there in the early 70s as a paramedic, working in rural clinics in the mountains. And so I was an educator, I did a lot of work on family planning. And then I also was a peasant organizer, working with the Catholic Church's peasant education program, doing a lot of leadership workshops. The only problem was that Somoza, the dictator, kept on arresting people afterwards. So you just felt enormously discouraged. It was a time of, devastating disappointment and people were arrested, they were disappeared. And then there was the massive earthquake that some of you maybe remember in 1972. It destroyed Managua, it leveled it to the ground. And it produced a wave of greed and corruption by the military and Somoza's cronies that was just obscene. So I left Nicaragua I almost had a nervous breakdown because of seeing all this and feeling so impotent. There was a glimmer of hope, because there was this rumor that there were these guys in the mountains called the Frente Sandinista de Liberación Nacional, the Sandinistas, and that they were fighting Somoza's troops in the mountains, and they were having some minor successes. So I had no idea what that would mean to me in the future. But I returned to the States and I started working on human rights, especially around Nicaragua and Central America, because of that experience. And I wrote reports for the Congress. I wrote all the reports, let's see, for the World Council of Churches, for the United Nations Commission on Human Rights, to try and show the world what Somoza was doing in his country, massacring so many people and leaving them in such abject poverty. And then 1979 happens. Some of you may be familiar with this date in terms of Nicaraguan history. It's when the Sandinistas, those guys in the mountains, came down and actually were victorious over Somoza's troops. And then I get an invitation of a lifetime. I get an invitation from a man named Father Fernando Cardenal, the Jesuit priest who was the head of the newly formed literacy campaign. And he was really eager to get started on this campaign. And he needed all the help he could get. And he knew, because of my human rights work, that I had done a lot of work on literacy and the Paulo Freire method. And so he sent me a note. Said, Valerie, God, you can remember, I can't find the note in all my boxes and my searches. I can't find the damn note. But anyway, I'm still looking for it. He invited me to come down and be his senior advisor on literacy and to help write the official history of the campaign. So that was quite a moment, because it was wild. He walked into the Ministry of Education in his office in the literacy campaign, and there were people scurrying all over the place. Okay? There were people from Nicaragua, of course, educators and activists from Nicaragua, but they came from all over Latin America. I think every country of Latin America had some person who was part of that literacy campaign. It also had a lot of people from Spain and had 2 gringos, 2 North Americans. Me and another guy named John McFadden from California, who was a professor of education, who was also fabulous and was so supportive. But it was a crazy time. I mean, all of us were imbued again with the spirit of Paulo Freire and trying to develop processes that would really help people develop their literacy skills, but also their critical thinking, analysis, and skills to become activists and change agents. We worked night and day, crazy hours, because we had about 5 or 6 months to put together a campaign. And so we had to get, first of all, order and find tens of thousands of uniforms, of boots, of mosquito nets, of gas lanterns, of what else, of first aid kits, of primers, of pencils, all the stuff you'd need for a campaign like that. And then we also, I mean, the educational statistics, when I look back now, are quite revealing. I mean, during that time, then we had these kind of evolving processes of workshops where you teach a group of teachers that they would go teach another group of teachers and then they would teach. And so finally, you could reach the 70,000 volunteer literacy teachers and prepare them to become teachers on the ground. So it was this cascade process to be able to develop this amazing cadre of literacy teachers. So 70,000, about 20,000 went to urban areas, and about 50,000 went to rural areas, mostly university and high school students. And let's see, oh, here we go. Not to forget. Here we have a literacy volunteer called a brigadista, and they all had, men and women, had what they called cotonas, which is this kind of cotton, simple cotton shirt, blue jeans, a hat, and a mochila, a little backpack right here, all there, essentially. So this was the literacy campaign volunteers, the brigadistas, who went out into the countryside. Eventually they reached about, the estimates say around 500, 550,000 people who were illiterate. And at the end of the 5-month campaign, they estimate that maybe around 400 had achieved basic reading and writing skills. How many actually achieved the kind of critical thinking, being able to read the world that we wanted to achieve, is really questionable. Some did, some didn't. It depended on the volunteer, it depended on the community. In some places it did, and I'll read some of the quotes from them so you'll get an idea of that. Okay, so we reduced, according to the statistics, the illiteracy rate from 50% to 13%. We won the UNESCO prize that year. And one of the things we did for learning aids and publicity were matches from the literacy campaign, okay? So I have, hopefully, enough matches to go around. Everybody can choose their matchbox, and Ralph will be very happy. As a memento. No, there might not be enough for you. Okay, so at the end of this campaign, at the end of the 5 months, we stood back and we were quite amazed and humbled and proud. And I want to read some of the quotes. Oh, yeah, here we go. From the campaign, which will give you a flavor of what went on, of both the brigadistas and the literacy students themselves. Okay, so here's one, and this is from one of the campaign advisors, because all, the organization was amazing. They had brigades, they had these smaller groups, they had contingents. I can't remember all the names they had. But the smaller group was always of maybe 10 volunteers, 10 brigadistas, was then headed and coordinated by a professional teacher. So those teachers then were responsible for the group. And this is what one of the educational advisors said. He said, "I'm really impressed how some of these kids came prepared and equipped. One of the boys looks like he's ready to fight the crocodile that always shows up in the jungle movies wanting to eat Tarzan. Another one has all the trappings of a walking Boy Scout store. It's a sure sign of how ignorant most of us are about how people live in the countryside. The hardest part for the volunteers is the loneliness and isolation, finding themselves suddenly living among strangers, with whom, at least up to now, they've had little in common. The feeling is one of anguish and insecurity. Thank God, because of their political spirit and Christian faith, none of my brigadistas have deserted. Every day they seem to adjust and find themselves enjoying life dear more. Well, not so much. Here's another quote. Dear Mom and Dad, I am fine. I arrived safe and sound, but please send me 20 cans of grape juice. The well is filled with mud and the river is far away. Love, your son. Oh, another one. Dear folks, I'm learning a lot. I now know how to milk a cow and plant vegetables. The other day I was with Don de Messio, roping a steer, but I'm so stupid that I frightened the thing and we had to work twice as hard to catch it again. The rains are constant, the soles of my boots became unglued, and I had to sew them with a needle that they make sacks with. And this is talking about the literacy work itself. This is from Guadalupe, from the Brigada and No Cortes. It's difficult sometimes. Tomasita is smart and wants to study, but her baby cries a lot and she can't put him down. I visit her 3 times a day just on the chance she'll be free, but she's only on lesson 4. Camilo doesn't seem to assimilate his sounds very well. Of course, he does need glasses. He's 67. Socorro and Joaquina are way ahead in lesson 14, but Julio left to pick coffee. And Catalina's in bed with malaria. Vicente has improved incredibly since he fell off his mule. He was really a lazy bum before, but now, with his broken arm, he's quite serious and dedicated, even though he's had to learn to read and write with his left arm. Left hand. Let's see. And then let me leave you with some of the notes from the literacy students. So some of them were quite creative, and they did poems. And so at the end of the campaign, they wanted to express their gratitude to the brigadistas, to the people who taught them how to read and write. So this is one. This is from, let's see, Anselmo Hurtado Lopez. And he said, to my literacy teacher and compañero, Guillermo Briones Cisnero, my friends, Nicaragua is free. The oppression of Somoza is defeated. For with the rumbling of bullets, Anastasio and son ran far away, and now with shouting ABCs, ignorance flees. And ignorance joins them in Paraguay, where they escaped. These verses I do recite in honor of Guillermo, my friend and compañero, because I respect him like no other and love him like an older brother. But I think one quote really summarizes for me or symbolizes the essence of the campaign. Let's see, where is that one? And it's the words of a peasant who was speaking to the mother of his literacy teacher, who came to visit at the end of the campaign. And so this is what he says to the mother about his teacher. He says, do you know, I'm not ignorant anymore. I know how to read now. Not perfectly, you understand, but I know how. And do you know, your son isn't ignorant anymore either. Now he knows how we live, what we eat, how we work, and he knows the life of the mountains. Your son, man, has learned to read from our book. So I think that really summarizes the spirit of the campaign and what was achieved at that time. So, of course, during the campaign, Ronald Reagan began a fearsome war against the revolution. Many people were killed. I mean, several brigadistas were killed. But also doctors, nurses, teachers, community leaders were assassinated. Villages were burned down. So amidst the hope and joy of the campaign, there was this horror, this terror that we were also seeing and living. And I felt this so acutely, of course, because my government was responsible. So I returned to the States to again work on solidarity and peace movements. And eventually that's when I joined UUSC to become the Director of Human Rights. And that's when I helped lead all these congressional delegations. Now, these delegations have a special meaning to me above and beyond the political stuff, because that's where Ralph and I met. He was on one delegation with academics, and I was on another delegation with Congress people. And so that's where I met my partner in crime. The man who's the overseer and the taskmaster of my boxes and announcements. The one I remember, though, most vividly is one with Barbara Mikulski. Do people remember or know Barbara Mikulski? Okay, so some do. So Barbara Mikulski is this fabulous, she's still alive. She ended up becoming a senator. At that time she was a congresswoman. She's very short, she's very strong and stout, and she has an energy. I think she was a social worker. She was amazing. And so she was a congresswoman at that time in Maryland, and she was on this congressional delegation that I was helping lead. And it was quite a, excuse me, but we were charged with investigating the situation in Central America, especially looking at what was happening in El Salvador. So this is the report. I'll pass this along too. And there's kind of in the middle, there's some pictures that you can look at. I'm going to pass it over here because these people got the other things first. Okay, so that was our charge. And Barbara and I were sent out into the hinterlands. We had to take this plane, this missionary plane, where the guy said, I'm not exactly sure where this is, where we're going, but if you look for these two mountains, and here's the map. It was quite a frightening experience, because then I had to be the navigator of this trip to get us to the right place. But anyway, we got there, and we were interviewing a variety of refugees who had come over from Salvador recently into Honduras. And of course, they were fleeing the horrors of the Salvadoran military. And to get there, they had to cross a river. We were very near this river. It was the River Blanca. And it had been a site of a recent massacre where 400 or 500 people were just mowed down by the military. So crossing that river and making that journey was one of such courage and such bravery. So the testimonies that we were taking, and it was like something out of Dante's Inferno. I mean, you just couldn't believe it. Where several people described pregnant women being bayoneted, their fetuses thrown in the air, dogs then taking them and dragging through the dirty streets. And Barbara and I wept. It was just, it was so horrific. So when we finished taking these testimonies, Barbara, who was quite an amazing woman, okay, she has in her pocket right here, she brings out something like this. It looks like a little clarinet, it's a recorder. And so she starts playing on her recorder. And so then all these kids are around us. So Barbara starts walking around the refugee camp. And all the kids are following her. I mean, she's like the Pied Piper of Hamelin meets the Pied Piper of Honduras. I mean, it was wild. It was so inspiring after what we had just heard. But then afterwards, we went to the U.S. Embassy in Honduras, and where the congressional delegation railed against the U.S. ambassador because of what they had seen and the evidence that they saw of human rights violations. And I have a memento from that time. So, as they were kind of railing against the ambassador, I don't know why, but I went into this little room and I found this. It was what the embassy used to deposit all the classified documents that then were meant to be burned. So I quickly grabbed one off the shelf, hid it among my stuff, and have carried it with me to this day and keep it on my shelf. Again, as a reminder of the horrors of our policy, but then again of the bravery and courage of the people I met and worked with. really put me on another path, a path of women's rights and feminist movement building. And what happened was Reagan was very unhappy about all sorts of things, seeing communists everywhere. And one of the organizations that was working with women in Central America was the League of Women, the League of, I can't remember, the League of Women Voters, right? League of Women Voters. And they had an organization, a branch that worked on international stuff and supported by USAID. And they were working with these women leaders from Central America, Honduras, Nicaragua, and Costa Rica. And so Reagan was very unhappy. He said, all those women are communists, and we're rescinding your funds right now immediately today. So we were in the middle of this, or they were in the middle of this program, right? They asked me if I would help them fundraise. So we mounted a fundraising campaign, and very quickly we raised like about $50,000, which was amazing at that time. But one of the most unexpected turns of that work was being in the house of Pamela Harriman, who some of you may know. Pamela Harriman, so the doyen of the Democratic Party, an amazing fundraiser. She ended up being ambassador to France. She was the place, the person, and her house was the place to have a fundraiser. So there I was with my compañeras, my Central American colleagues, and we're standing in the line greeting everybody, and we're looking up. Van Gogh, Picasso, Matisse, Renoir. We're like, oh my word, how did we end up here? But it was a very successful funding event, and it was a very successful campaign. But seeing that then launched me on that other direction of working in women's rights. And going into the 80s, I reconnected with a fabulous, brilliant U.S. woman named Lisa Van Klassen, some of you may know. And she and I had worked in Nicaragua. We had also connected over the years in different projects. And one of the concerns we had at that time was that social justice work and social change work was kind of losing its way, at least in terms of our eyes, because it was tending to focus only, almost exclusively on human rights advocacy work with elite organizations and elite power holders in Washington, D.C. It was essentially leaving behind all the community development work, all the organizing work, all the consciousness raising work that really for us was the key to making change happen. And so we talked about this a lot because we saw that, yeah, you have to challenge the visible power of government. That's really important. But you have to be aware of some of the invisible forces, some of the shadow forces that are working sometimes behind the scenes. The corporate power, sometimes the drug cartels, sometimes the religious fundamentalist groups. You had to work with those and understand those and address those as well. But most importantly, you had to tackle the invisible forms of power that were the belief systems that people had, that were shaped by the sexism, the racism, and all those isms that puts some people down here and some people. And so it was just so crucial for us to really examine that and to present our concerns, to be able to share them with so many activists around the world. And so what we ended up doing is writing something that was called A New Weave of Power, People, and Politics, the action guide for advocacy and citizen participation, that again focused on things like consciousness raising and community organizing and local leadership. And so this was what we did out of that concern that we had. You know, it's heavy. Oh, well. If you want to look at it, otherwise it's baffling. But it was a labor of love, a real labor of love. And it's been used by, it's been translated to a variety of languages, including Bahasa Indonesia, the Indonesian language. And so it's been used by activists and academics around the world. So this led to another moment, this is the final moment, y'all. This led to Lisa and I creating something called Just Associates, called jazz, for sure we love jazz. Because all the improvisation and playing off one another comes into and to play with that word, jazz. But it's this global network of activists and academics who really focus on strengthening women's personal power and girls' individual power and then their collective power. And it was really, quite frankly, it was selfish. We did it because we brought together all our favorite people. Our favorite people who we had worked with for years around the world, who were the activists, who were the educators, who were the academics who were concerned about these kinds of issues. And we all wanted to stay together in some way, shape, or form to continuing nurturing one another, challenging one another, and then to be able to work with the communities that we so loved. So we are now together in jazz. It's a wide-ranging network of activists and academics with a central staff of about 35 or 40. And we do this. We do training, we do research, we do advocacy, we do movement building, we dance, we sing, we do drama. All these things that energize and inspire that are so important. But one of the features, the distinguishing features of our work is this power analysis, looking at power both its positive side and its negative side. And that really has become a special feature of our work that brings other people on board. So after all of this, let me just give you a quick synopsis of what Jazz does. So over the last 16 years now of our existence, we've helped catalyze and support a variety of women's organizations and work on HIV/AIDS in Southern Africa, in Southeast Asia on women's economic empowerment and young women's organizing, in Mesoamerica working with women who are trying to stop the ravages of the mining companies and develop defense networks. So that has been really exciting, but it's also difficult work. There's a Haitian woman who I was once with, and she said, and this expression just to me says so much. She says, Valerie, she says, you know what? Being a woman is kind of like trying to cook a cloud or fry rainwater. So I always think about that woman. She was very wise. But, despite all of this, women really have made enormous strides. And we've seen this in our work. For example, in Malawi, women have come together in a campaign that has really gained them a regimen of AIDS drugs that are very effective and has allowed them to come together to continue to advocate before their government on these kinds of issues. One is getting fair prices for AIDS drugs. In Indonesia, women have developed a network of economic cooperatives, savings and loan cooperatives, now reach about 30,000 to 35,000 women, an extraordinary effort. And also a young women's network that has been developed there. In Mesoamerica, in Mexico and Central America, women have come together in defense networks because of the violence that they're facing. But then also they've been successful in some cases of actually overturning some of the mining companies' concessions in their countries. Now, the challenge, of course, is the power dynamics that they're facing and the backlash that they inevitably face. And so we're seeing this around the world, whether it's the economic disparities, the corporate greed, the militarism, the racism, the sexism, the narcissistic strongmen everywhere, and underpinning it all, people's beliefs shaped by lies and fear, so easy to manipulate, whether here or there. So a large part of our work today, given this whole context, is really helping women fight off these forces and defend themselves. And we do that, one, by strengthening their personal power, the power of their hearts, their minds, their bodies, and their leadership, and their collective power, their power together with organizations, with movements and strategies, and above all, their capacity to build ever stronger networks of support and of solidarity. So we find women all over the providing examples of resistance and courage that can inspire us as we face similar forces of corporate greed, misogyny, sexism, corruption. And the words, I'd like to close with the words of a Chilean poet. My love affair with Spanish and my love affair with Latin America. Some of you may know Pablo Neruda. And he wrote these words, and I think it was in his, when he accepted the Pulitzer Prize, the Nobel Prize. And it was the title of the book I wrote on the Nicaraguan literacy crusade. It's a struggling book. So, this is what he said. If I can find it. Where are you, Pablo? Don't you love when you look at those things? No, that's not it. Oh, yes, it is. And it goes to the symbol of the light, too. He says, if we want the darkness to flower, if we hope to establish lands of dignity and integrity with the millions of people who still have not learned to read or write, lands where all people can live in light and justice, then our guiding stars must be struggle and hope. So I think those guiding stars are with us today, and this lovely light. So thank you very much.
Put that to one side, and what has happened, because we never see this coming, to the kind of routine work for international development. Has this administration left a fingerprint there? How are AID doing? What's going on today in the kind of work that you have committed your life to?
Well, I mean, obviously, I think it's very discouraging in terms of this administration, but I think around the world, to me, it's discouraging, Gus, because the work that was done in the 70s, 80s, and 90s, that kind of community development work, that solid work on the ground, really, I don't see it in the same way I saw it then. And I really am very concerned. I mean, what's happened is groups that were doing this kind of work, there's an organization in England, now it's international, called Action Aid International, which to me has been one of the best ones. But what happened, they went on this bandwagon, with reason, to work on the political side of human rights and doing all this advocacy work. They abandoned all the work they did on the ground. All the fabulous people that were doing the literacy work, that were doing the community development work, that really made a difference. And so I look at that and I think there has to be a renaissance of coming back to this kind of work, because it's the meaning, it's the change that we're talking about. And it's working with people to really help them become participants in these processes. And so that's the challenge. And where I see the hope, I see the hope in the women's movements. I mean, there's amazing things going on that we have no idea about. And so how to support some of those kinds of things. And the vision they have, for example, around the environment, which is just, they're called ecofeminists. I mean, they're doing some fabulous work that combine the community development, but also combine this awareness of the environment and what we need to do. So that's where I see the hope, but it's very discouraging to me. Because I don't know, the UN, not so much. The UN used to have some fantastic people and structures that were really doing some good things. And maybe it's there, I don't see it anymore. Yeah.
I'm very curious to hear your take on what's going on in Nicaragua.
So some of you may have followed this. In the spring, there was an uprising started really by the kids against Daniel Ortega and his wife, Murillo's administration. And it's triggered, multiple multiple uprisings, protests, where a good percentage of the population have essentially said that Daniel Ortega and his wife are corrupt, and they are going against our interests. And so what's happened in the ensuing months is, I don't know what the toll now is up in terms of how many people have been killed by the government, but it's quite significant. And I mean, I go back to thinking about when I was leaving Nicaragua at a certain point, some of my friends were leaving government. This was like, it's just like the mid-'80s, and they were starting their own NGOs. They still believed in the principles of the revolution, but they saw that the government was very bureaucratic and there were some authoritarian tendencies, and so they began to leave. Fernando Cardinal, the Jesuit priest who was my boss, left very dramatically at one point during a big national convention of the Frente Sandinista, because he saw this authoritarian quality, and he wanted to register his opposition to it. Personally, all my friends, practically, with maybe the exception of one or two, have left the Sandinistas to start another organization, a political organization, that essentially is grounded on the founding principles of the Sandinistas, which is that search for some kind of equality and justice for all. And so you just see, I mean, you know that old adage, power corrupts. And how you have structures in society that can be counterpoints to that power that can hold people accountable. What happened is Rosario and Daniel have just concentrated power so much and limited these kinds of NGOs and other organizations and movements from operating, so there aren't any really checks and balances. So you have this incredible outburst of people trying to gain back their revolution or some sense of equality and fairness. It's not a, yeah. Mark.
Could you comment on the current migration that's taking place and what's going on in Honduras? And
so some of you may have seen in the reporting lately, there is a group of they call a caravan. It's mostly, as I gather, people, families from Honduras going up to the States, trying to get asylum in the States. And now what's happened is this administration has put the screws to the Guatemalan government and to the Mexican government, saying you've got to stop these people from crossing your borders so they won't get to the States. And so there's been this skirmish and confrontation at the border with Mexico and Guatemala. And I mean, to me, it's just an act of such desperation, And unfortunately, I think a few of us...
What you just said, I'm sorry.
Oh, it's an act of desperation, the caravan. It's just an act of... and I think few of us, unfortunately, in the States have any kind of historical perspective on why this exists. And so when you go back and you look, even to the Contra Wars, for example, the Reagan Wars, what happened then is the United States built huge air bases in Honduras, taking over great swaths of land, and they had to be flat land, right? They were productive lands. So that, and our policies have not been very supportive of any kind of real development for the poor people. But there's this other dynamic, and it's the dynamic that you may hear of in terms of the gangs, that people are fleeing the poverty, they're fleeing the horrors of their own governments, and they're also fleeing from the gangs. There's lots of gangs, okay? But so where did those gangs come from? So when you do an analysis, again going back to the Contra Wars, those gangs come from kids who fled Central America during those wars to the United States, to Los Angeles, to protect themselves in Los Angeles against the local gangs. They developed their own gangs, the Salvadorian gangs and the Honduran gangs. And then when the policy changed, all those kids, now strong gang members, were deported back to their countries. And so you had the unleashing of these gangs on these communities. Things like that didn't exist before in Central America. And so how we understand the dynamics and then how we develop a policy that makes sense, given that kind of situation, to me is the challenge. So, yes, ready.
Venezuela.
Venezuela.
How about the welfare of the people who have gone through this terrible political?
Yeah, it's awful. It's awful.
Is it as bad as it seems to be?
I don't know because I don't know Venezuela, but certainly in reading what I've heard, it does seem pretty awful. And I fear, there's a tendency to see U.S. imperialism behind everything, and it's behind a lot. But it's like, okay, so you have a man like Daniel Ortega and his wife Rosario Murillo, who to me are just despots. And then you have the leadership in Venezuela, and some of them are just demagogues. And how we sort out people and leaders who can really respond to the challenges of their countries in a fair and just way, I think is really difficult. Because there's a tendency to say that everybody that is against the United States is somehow a symbol of great justice. Well, I haven't found that. But Venezuela is certainly an awful place right now. Yeah. Colin?
You talked about being able to read the world. I wonder how much of a factor you see it that there's some political illiteracy in the United States. And how much would it help if that were better, and what's going on about that?
Yeah. To me, it's really crucial. When we talk about confronting invisible power, it's that those belief systems, that lack of information that so many of us have in this country. And how, during the Reagan Wars, we had all these This was something we did at UUSC. It's called High Hopes, Harsh Realities, the Challenge and Development of Central America. And it was a way to educate people on what was going on in Central America and to have conversations about it. And this was going on a lot during that time. From churches all around the country. And labor unions. This is really important work. I don't see this happening anymore. I don't know whether you all see it happening. But I think it's great we need it.
I was going to ask a question related to that.
Yeah.
But, finish what you said.
Yeah, no, I think it's enormously needed, Colin, and how we go about doing it. And re-energizing the forces of the better angels is just crucial.
So my question is, so we in this congregation fundraise every year through the USC, through the Best at Your Table program.
Yes.
And I guess my question would be, how do you see that work still playing out when in this decline of NGOs and community development?
No, to me it's absolutely crucial. The work of the USC, the work of AFSC, the work of a lot of the church groups and some of the labor unions continue, but at a much reduced level. And I think it's really important to re-energize those things. Another thing, I was very proud of. The guest at the table helps support, besides the other, is the work that we did. Some of you may have seen this before, also in the late 80s, early 90s, was the whole idea of children's rights in the States. And so we developed these campaign materials on children's rights for congregations. One, to be able to get more educated about some of the issues, and then being able to use that in their work with community organizing, their work with Congress, and their work with a congregation. And so for us, these kinds of things are so important. And I think they're still out there. I don't know what they are right now. And I think it's absolutely crucial. One of the things we're doing now at Jazz is we're working with a coalition of women's organizations in the States working on violence against women, bringing them to Central America to talk with and share strategies with women in the region So these kinds of exchanges sometimes can be helpful too.
I used this when I was a
What?
When I was a kid growing up, that congregate, we had that stuff.
Oh, you did? Oh, great. Oh, so much fun to write. Oh, it's just amazing. There were wonderful quotes by kids. They were fabulous. Anyway, but anything else, or should we close with?
All right. Well, thank you so much. And I think what's inspiring is your life, and that we just keep going on. So, there will be snacks downstairs. We extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. These we carry in our hearts until we are all together again.